go from this to this using only the Kickstarter miniature paints. Hey, I'm Josh. I'm here to help you with your Stormlight miniature painting. If you are a new painter, watch the beginning of this video where I walk through some of the core things that you need to be aware of. If you've been around the block a little bit with miniatures and just want to see how I painted this Alethi Spearman, feel free to skip ahead to my step-by-step process. So the first tip I have for you is start by cleaning the model. What I'm doing here is using the back of X-Acto knife blade to take off any mold lines that are on the Alethi Spearman. And I decided to clean my miniature with soap and water and rinse it off like that. Check out my video of why I did this. So if you've looked around on miniature painting, you probably heard about priming your miniature. So you need your mini, and you're gonna need a plastic bag, and then of course you're gonna need your rattle spray can. I use Rust-Oleum flat or matte paint. I usually default to black. You can use white or gray. What you're gonna need to do is put your hand into the plastic bag and grip the mini with the hand in the bag. This will protect your hand from any paint that may get on your hand. Once you get that, you're gonna take your rattle can and shake it up, as you usually do. And then about this far away from the miniature, you're gonna go in quick bursts, going at all different angles of the miniature to cover everything, even from the top. Then you're gonna put it somewhere to dry. When you start painting your miniature, you're gonna need a couple things close at hand. First, you're gonna start with a brush. If you need recommendations on additional brushes to use, please look at my previous video. Otherwise, you can just stick with the brush that Brotherwise provided in the Kickstarter. Next, you'll need a water cup. This is just filled with regular water from the sink. You're gonna need a palette of some kind. Some people recommend a wet palette. I've used wet palettes and it's great, but for beginners, I would just recommend a paper plate. Optionally, you can get a mini holder. There's lots of companies that do this. I use an old prescription bottle. I've heard some people use spice bottles from their kitchen. Whatever works best for you. With your miniature, you're gonna put sticky putty on the bottom of the base, and you're gonna stick it onto the mini holder, and this enables you to hold the miniature without getting any paint on your hands. Additionally, you'll need a paper towel to wipe off any excess paint or any excess water. Now, at the beginning, when I first started painting miniatures, I didn't realize the importance of having a good light. I went years without doing it, and it took a toll on my painting ability as well as my eyes. I highly recommend getting a lamp of some kind, a task lamp, and getting it really bright and really close to where you are painting your miniature so you can see all the details and make appropriate choices with your brush. And the phrase that I know all of you have heard about when talking about miniature painting is thin your paints. Now, what does this mean? This means that you want to get your miniature paints, put it on the palette, and then thin it down with water. You want your paint to be at a melted ice cream consistency. Once you have it at this point, it's ready to go onto the miniature. What thinning your paints does is it makes sure that you don't clog up the details of your mini with thick paint. These Army Painter paints are very thick. They're the thickest I've used in my miniature painting career. To deal with that, I highly recommend you shake it as much as you can before putting it on the palette. Once you've shaken it a lot, you can put it on the palette and then use a lot of water to make sure that it's thinned out and to a good consistency. Now, as you do this, the pigments are going to be separated a little bit, and you're going to need to use more thin coats on your miniatures. And I'll go through that in the step-by-step process of what that looks like. I start out with a primer in black, and so after that dried, I started with a base coat of Colin Blue. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, these Kickstarter paints are very thick. You can see here that the paint is not covering very well just because I had to thin the paint so much to get the right consistency. And that's okay. This is the second coat of Colin Blue. So after the first coat had dried, I went back around with a second coat to cover up the legs, tunic, the arms, the front of the shield, and the back of the shield. So here you can see I'm doing the back, and don't forget that leg that is covered up by the shield. You want to get some paint on there. And then I'm doing the front of the shield, kind of going around the glyphs in the center. Here is the third coat of Colin Blue. And something with the blue is you can get it everywhere. You don't have to be stuck in the lines. You'll cover up everything else on the model with other paints later on. And here's the fourth coat of Colin Blue. Lots of thin coats. Okay, then I mix it up with some Shard Bearer Silver. Now with this one I did get a different paintbrush out because I like to do metallics using a different paintbrush, but I still thinned down the paint because it was thick and applied it on the spear tip as well as the other metallic parts of the body like the breastplate and the arm shields, and then I went around the edges of the shield. So here's the base coat of dark brown. Again, shake and thin these paints. I did the spear haft. I also went in and base coated the leather parts. So I did the shield, handle. I went in and did the face and the hands. And then I came back and I did the belt. I also did the boots. You could do the boots black if you want, but I wanted to kind of challenge myself there. And then here I am base coating the whole base in dark brown. After that dried, I went back and did a second coat across all the different pieces. And here is the fifth coat of Colin Blue. As I went around the model doing dark brown, I saw areas where I could do more blue. And then I came through and did a highlight. So this highlight, especially on the leather parts, I just am taking the edges of the different leather pieces and getting a small brush and a little bit of paint on the tip and going around on those different edges. And then on the boots, the picture here isn't that focused, sorry about that, but going around the boots and just catching the edges, just really pronouncing those details helps make the miniature pop. Now it's time for a wash, and so I use the strong tone, and you can get a lot on your brush for this because you can spread it around pretty fast. And so here you see that I'm kind of diluting the stark contrast of that light tan highlight just to make it seem a little bit more leathery. I covered all the fabric with some thick strong tone, just seep into the crevices to kind of bring out the details. And then of course going and doing the armor pieces. And on the shield especially, you want to get the strong tone in the edges between the blue and the silver. And this really helps add definition to the frame of the shield. And then of course, slathering a lot onto the base. I really wanted to get that Shattered Plains feel, and so you need to make those cracks dark. And here I'm mixing medium tan and dark brown. I'm creating a little highlight for myself because I didn't like the super stark contrast of the light tan, and so I mixed it together with the dark brown to get a better look for the skin tone of the Alethi, and also kind of bringing down the starkness of the leather highlights that I had there. Well, I started with Windrunner Blue, this highlight, and what I do here is I find the edges, any of the raised edges on the fabric. You want to go through and kind of bring those out from the Colin Blue as well as from that strong tone. So you're bringing out the details with this highlight. You can highlight the edges of the tunic with a different color like white or something if you want, but I wanted to kind of keep it simple and just highlight it with a nice Windrunner Blue. And then I came back with a second coat of dark brown, and I went back to the base to do this. This is matte white. So I went in and did the glyphs on the shield. I have a smaller brush to get into the details. If you go over on the blue, that's okay. We can come back and fix it. I did try some of the yellow on the bondsmith yellow on the shoulder thingies, but I decided to go back in and change that to white just to kind of add some synergy to the model because the yellow really was clashing with the rest of the paint. And then I came back with a second coat of matte white. With white, you really want to make sure that it's just white, so you can do as many thin coats as you need. I came back to my Shard Blade Silver, and kind of did some touch-ups. Alright, here's our second highlight with Windrunner Blue. This highlight is thicker than the last one. I really wanted to make the details pop, and so feel free to really lather on some highlights here because this is probably my favorite part of the process, is bringing out those details, those raised edges with that lighter blue. And then the tricky little spot there of the shirt coming through the collar. And on the shield itself, I just kind of started painting some highlights kind of imitating the light coming on and hitting the shield. Do whatever you feel is best here. And then be sure around the glyphs, be sure to highlight all the way around the glyphs to cover up any of the excess white that came off. And then of course you can go to the back of the shield and do a little bit of highlighting. This just adds some contrast to your miniature. Okay, I came back for a second coat of strong tone. Now this wash will help dilute a little bit of the starkness and kind of mix things together. I wanted to make sure I really soaked into some of the crevices, especially on these white glyphs. Adding the strong tone gave it kind of, for lack of a better term, a parchment type look. I didn't want stark white because stark white I'm reserving for anything that is glowing, and I'll get to that in another video. But I went through and really made sure the details popped out of that white, those white glyphs. Then came back around and did the leather to make it feel really leathery, and then did another coat on the base. Okay, now this part is a dry brush, and I did medium tan. And what you want to do is make sure you have the water out of your brush. You don't want too much water on it. Actually, you don't want any water on it. That's why it's called dry brushing. And then you dip your paintbrush into the paint. You wipe off any excess onto the paper towel. As you can see there on my first application, it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. You kind of wanted to catch the raised areas and not drag across the model. You just wanted to catch and be really kind of stiff bristles. And so this paintbrush I'm using, I use specifically for dry brushing because it will destroy your paintbrushes. So highly recommend a paintbrush with short, firm bristles. And you can see just kind of going back and forth and catching those raised areas with this brush. This is a lot easier than trying to do edge highlighting on that base. And it gives it a more natural look when you do dry brushes. After I went around a few times, I got kind of the texture and the look that I wanted. Leave your recommendations and feedback in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe so you can see my next tutorial.